Some stories get told at church socials, passed around like warm bread until everybody's heard them a dozen times. Some get written in history books, all proper and official-like. And some we carry quiet inside for near 50 years, waiting for the right moment to pass them on. I'm 70 years old now, sitting here in my parlor in Denver with my grandson at my feet. There's snow falling outside this window just like there was that winter in Montana. The boy asked me yesterday what that old deputy's badge means, the one I keep on the mantle next to my war photograph. Why I keep it when I only wore it for 8 months back in '76. Tonight, I'm going to tell him. But I need you to promise me something, boy. You'll listen all the way through. Because this ain't a simple story about heroes and villains. It's about a young fool, me, who thought he knew what justice looked like. And it's about a widow who taught me different. Her name was Eleanor Blackwood. The town was Whispering Pines, Montana Territory, February of 1876. The coldest winter I ever lived through, and I don't mean just the weather. I mean the kind of cold that settles in your bones when you realize the man you trusted most in the world has been lying to your face. The kind that makes you understand that courage ain't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right when everything inside you is screaming to look the other way. I wrote it all down the week after it happened, every detail I could remember. I kept that journal for 47 years now. Let me open it up and take you back to the morning everything started to come apart. The dawn broke cold and pink over the Montana Territory on February 12, 1876. I remember the date because it was exactly 1 year since Thomas Blackwood died. Not that I knew it then. I was just a deputy making my morning rounds, 23 years old, and still young enough to think a badge made a man righteous. The snow had fallen fresh overnight, maybe 3 inches. It muffled everything, turned the whole world quiet as a church on Monday. My horse's breath came out in clouds. My fingers were going numb even through my gloves. I was thinking about coffee and the warm stove back at the sheriff's office when I saw her, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, standing at the edge of her property line like a statue carved from ice. She didn't move when I rode past on the trail above her land, just stood there in the pre-dawn light, staring out toward the western tree line. She wore a dark coat and a simple bonnet. Her breath made small clouds in the frozen air. In her hands, she held a small leather journal. I reined in my horse, watching her from maybe 50 yards up the ridge. I don't know why I stopped. Something about the way she stood there, so still, so focused, like she was studying something the rest of us couldn't see. As I watched, she walked along her fence line with careful, measured steps. Every 20 paces or so, she'd stop. She'd pull out that journal and make a notation. Then she'd look around, checking the trees, the ground, the sight lines from the road. Her movements were precise, economical, nothing wasted. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. After about 10 minutes of this, she turned and walked back toward her cabin. She never looked up toward the ridge where I sat my horse, never gave any sign she knew I was there, but I had the strangest feeling that she knew exactly where I was, that she'd known the whole time. I waited until she disappeared inside before I rode on. Whispering Pines wasn't much to look at in those days. One main street, maybe 20 buildings if you counted generous. False fronts on most of them, trying to look bigger than they were. The general store, the saloon, the assayer's office, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly north. The sheriff's office sat at the end of the street, a sturdy log building with bars on the windows and a stove that ate wood faster than a man could chop it. But it was safe, or so we told ourselves. The war had been over 11 years. The frontier was settling down. We had law and order, we had Sheriff Clayton Mills, and we had faith that civilization was finally winning over the wildness. We were wrong about all of that. I stopped at the general store first, like I did most mornings. Mrs. Sarah Peterson was already up, sweeping the porch in the cold. She was maybe 58, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She considered it her Christian duty to know everybody's business. "Morning, Deputy Garrison," she called out as I tied up my horse. "You're out early." "Patrol, ma'am," making sure everything's quiet. Well, it ain't all quiet. She leaned on her broom and lowered her voice, even though there wasn't another soul on the street yet. I saw her again last night. That widow Blackwood. I felt something tighten in my chest. Saw her doing what, ma'am? Walking in the woods. Near midnight it was. I couldn't sleep, came down to get some warm milk, looked out my window, and there she was, walking through the trees with a lantern like it was the middle of the day. Maybe she couldn't sleep either, I offered. Mrs. Peterson shook her head firmly. A proper woman don't go wandering the woods at midnight, Deputy. That ain't natural. That ain't grief. That's something else. She lost her husband a year ago today, I said, though I don't know why I felt the need to defend her. Maybe she needed some air. A year ago today, exactly. Mrs. Peterson's voice dropped to a whisper. And you know what folks say about that death. Thomas Blackwood was a good rider, best tracker in 3 counties. He don't just fall off his horse into Widow's Gorge for no reason. I'd heard the whispers. Everybody had. But Sheriff Mills had investigated and ruled it an accident. That was good enough for me. Had to be. She don't cry, you know, Mrs. Peterson continued. Never seen her shed a single tear. Not at the funeral, not after. She just stands there with those cold eyes, watching everything, watching everyone, like she's taking notes. That image stuck with me, taking notes, like the journal I'd just seen her holding. She's planning something, Deputy, mark my words. That woman ain't what she seems. I thanked Mrs. Peterson for the information and headed toward the sheriff's office. The sun was fully up now, painting the snow gold. Smoke rose from chimneys up and down the street. Whispering Pines was waking up to another day, and on the surface, everything looked peaceful. But Mrs. Peterson's words followed me like a shadow. Sheriff Clayton Mills was already at his desk when I walked in. He was a big man, maybe 54 years old, with a graying beard and hands like ham hocks. He'd been sheriff for 20 years, and before that he'd fought in the war. He never talked much about which battles, but you could see it in his eyes, sometimes. That faraway look men get when they're seeing things that happened long ago. He was like a father to me. My own pa had died at Shiloh when I was 9. When I came to Whispering Pines 8 months ago, looking for work and running from my own war ghosts, Mills took me in, gave me the deputy badge, taught me how to read sign and how to talk to angry drunks without drawing your gun. He was patient and kind and everything a lawman should be. That's what made what came after so much harder. "Mornings, Jamie," he said, not looking up from the papers on his desk. "How's the town looking?" "Quiet, sir." Did my usual circuit. "Everything seems peaceful." "Good, good." He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. "You see anything unusual out there? Anything worth mentioning?" The question was casual, too casual. I felt that tightness in my chest again. "Saw Mrs. Blackwood out early," I said, "checking her fence line, looked like." Mills's eyes sharpened. "Did she see you?" "Don't think so, sir. I was up on the Ridge Road." He nodded slowly, then stood and walked to the window. For a long moment he just looked out at the street. When he spoke again, his voice was different, careful. "Jamie, I need you to do something for me, something that might seem a bit unusual." "Yes, sir." "I need you to keep an eye on Mrs. Blackwood. Note her comings and goings, where she goes, who she talks to, what she's doing out there on that property of hers." He turned to face me. "But I need you to do it quiet-like. Don't let her know she's being watched." I must have looked confused because he held up a hand. "I know how it sounds, watching a grieving widow. But there's things you don't know about, son, things I can't explain just yet. I need you to trust me on this." "I do trust you, sir, and I meant it. But has she done something wrong?" "Not yet." Mills came back to his desk and sat down heavily. "But prevention's part of our job, ain't it? Keeping the peace means seeing trouble before it starts." He pulled out a drawer and removed a folder. Inside were several official-looking documents. I could see letterhead from the Territorial Marshal's office. "There's been some concern," he said carefully, "about Mrs. Blackwood's background, where she came from back east, what she did before she and her husband settled here. The Marshals have asked us to keep an informal eye on her, nothing official, just awareness. "What kind of background, sir?" Mills closed the folder. "The kind that's best left alone if it turns out to be nothing. But if it's something," he met my eyes, "well then we need to know about it before anyone gets hurt." Something felt wrong about this, but I couldn't name what. Mills had never steered me wrong before. He'd been nothing but straight with me since I arrived. If he said there was cause for concern, there must be. "I'll do it, sir," I said. "Keep watch. Report to you." "Good man." Relief flickered across his face. "Just be careful, Jamie. If there is something to worry about with that woman, she won't take kindly to being observed. Stay back. Stay safe. And come to me first if you see anything strange." As I left the office and headed back out into the cold, I tried to shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Mills was right. This was just prevention, keeping the town safe. That's what I'd signed on for when I took this badge. But I kept thinking about Mrs. Peterson's words. She's planning something. And I kept seeing Eleanor Blackwood standing in the snow at dawn, writing in that journal, checking sightlines and distances with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I'd seen that kind of focus before, in the war, in soldiers preparing for battle. The question I didn't want to ask myself was simple. What kind of battle was a widow preparing for? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small room above the boarding house, listening to the wind howl through the eaves. My war photograph sat on the table beside my bed. Me and Ray Hawkins, standing in our Union blues, looking young and stupid and alive. Ray had saved my life at Petersburg, carried me 3 miles with a bullet in my leg. I hadn't seen him since the war ended. Last I heard, he was down in Missouri working freight. Good man. Best friend I ever had. I wondered what he'd think of this situation. Watching a widow on orders from the sheriff. Probably tell me to trust my gut. Ray always said the gut knows things the head tries to talk itself out of. My gut said something wasn't right. But I was 23 years old, trying to outrun the ghost of a Confederate boy I'd shot when he was reaching for a white flag. Trying to prove I could do something right for once in my life. Trying to make Sheriff Mills proud. So I told my gut to shut up. I'd keep an eye on Mrs. Blackwood, just like Mills asked. I had no idea I was about to become a piece in a game that had been set in motion a full year before. No idea that the widow I was watching everything and everyone with eyes that missed nothing. No idea that in less than a week I'd have to choose between the man I called father and a woman I barely knew. And that choice would teach me what justice really looks like. But that's getting ahead of the story. For now, I was just a deputy following orders, watching a strange widow who walked in the woods at midnight and studied her fence line like a general studying a battlefield. Tomorrow I'd start my surveillance. Tomorrow everything would start to unravel. I started watching Eleanor Blackwood the next morning, told myself it was just a job, just following orders. But somewhere deep down, in that place where a man keeps his uncomfortable truths, I knew I was looking for something to justify what I was doing. I wanted her to be dangerous, wanted her to be planning something, because if she wasn't, then what did that make me? Just another man spying on a woman who'd lost everything and wanted to be left alone. The first day, I positioned myself on the ridge road at dawn, same place I'd seen her before. She came out right on schedule, like she was keeping to some invisible timetable. Same dark coat, same leather journal, same methodical walk along her property line. I watched her stop at what looked like a fence post. She knelt down, examined something at the base, made a note in her journal. Moved on to the next post, then the next. At each stop she'd pull something from her coat pocket, I couldn't see what, and do something near the ground, setting traps maybe, for rabbits or foxes. But something about the way she moved didn't fit that explanation. There was too much precision, too much calculation, like she was measuring distances, checking angles. After an hour, she went back inside. I waited another 30 minutes, then rode down to check the fence posts myself. I couldn't find anything unusual, just fence posts in snow-covered ground. If there were traps, they were better hidden than any I'd ever seen. The second day, I followed her into the woods. She took a trail that led west from her property, deeper into the pine forest. I stayed back far enough that she shouldn't have heard my horse, but close enough to keep her in sight. The trail climbed up toward a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley. She stopped at a lightning-scarred oak tree, spent 10 minutes there, walking in circles around it, looking up at the branches, down at the roots, writing in that journal the whole time. Then she moved to a boulder formation, did the same thing. Then to a small clearing where a creek ran through. At each location, she was studying something, measuring something. But what? I was so focused on watching her that I didn't hear her horse until it was too late. "Good morning, Deputy Garrison." Her voice came from behind me. I spun in my saddle, hand going to my pistol out of pure instinct. Eleanor Blackwood sat on her horse maybe 20 feet away, on a part of the trail I'd already passed. She must have circled back somehow, used the trees to mask her approach. Her face was calm, almost amused. "Mrs. Blackwood," I managed, trying to sound official, "didn't expect to see you out here. Didn't you?" She tilted her head slightly. "You've been following me for 2 days now. I assumed you expected to see quite a lot of me." My face went hot. "I'm just doing my morning patrol, ma'am. Same route every day. The same route that happens to follow my movements exactly." She urged her horse forward a few steps. Not threatening, just closing the distance. "Deputy, I'm not stupid. And I suspect you're not either. So let's not insult each other with lies." I didn't know what to say to that. In the war, when we got caught doing reconnaissance, we either fought or ran. But this wasn't the war. This was a widow on her own land, calling me out for spying on her. "Sheriff Mills asked me to keep an eye on things," I said finally. Figured honesty was my only play now. "Make sure you're safe out here." "Safe?" She repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "Is that what he told you? That he's concerned for my safety?" "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a long moment. Her eyes were gray like winter clouds, and they had a quality I recognized. I'd seen it in soldiers who'd been in too many fights. A kind of distance, like they were always watching, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "You were at Petersburg," she said. Not a question. I felt ice run down my spine. "How did you—" "The way you scan a tree line before you enter a clearing, the way you never stand in a doorway, always to the side, the way you check your back trail without seeming to." She paused. "Only soldiers know those habits. And only soldiers who've been shot at keep them after the war ends." I couldn't speak. Nobody in Whispering Pines knew those details about me. I'd told Mills I'd served, but not where or in what capacity. "I'm not your enemy, Deputy Garrison." Her voice softened slightly. "But I'm not going to pretend I don't know when I'm being watched. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to go back to Sheriff Mills and tell him you've observed me, that I walk my property, check my fence lines, and mind my own business, because that's all I'm doing. Ma'am, And then," she continued, "you're going to ask yourself why a sheriff would send a good man to spy on a widow, what he thinks I might be doing that's worth your time, and whether the answers he gives you match up with what you see with your own eyes." She turned her horse, preparing to leave. Then she looked back at me. "The war was a long time ago, Deputy, but it never really ends, does it? We carry it with us, in the way we move, the way we think, the things we see that other folks miss." She paused. "I recognize a fellow soldier when I see one, even if he's on the wrong side of this particular battlefield." Then she was gone, riding back down the trail toward her cabin, leaving me sitting there with more questions than I'd started with. That night I tried to write it all in my report to Mills, tried to make it sound official and professional. But the words kept coming out wrong. Subject aware of surveillance, confronted observer, requested cessation of monitoring, appears to be conducting normal property maintenance. I stared at those words. They were true, but they felt like a lie. Because Eleanor Blackwood wasn't conducting normal property maintenance. She was doing something else, something I didn't understand. But what bothered me more was what she'd said about Mills. Why would a sheriff send a good man to spy on a widow? I didn't want to answer that question, so instead I opened the desk drawer in my small room and pulled out my war photograph. Me and Ray, looking young and whole. Before Petersburg, before I shot that boy reaching for a surrender flag because I was too scared and too green to see what he was really doing. Ray had saved me after that, not just physically, carrying me when I was wounded, but mentally. Telling me that war makes killers of us all, and the only thing that matters is what we do after. Do something right, Jamie, he'd have said the last time I saw him. Find a way to make it balance out. Won't erase what you did, but it might let you sleep at night. That's why I became a deputy, to do something right, to protect people instead of killing them. But if I was protecting people, why did I feel so much like I was doing something wrong? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I kept thinking about what Mrs. Peterson had said, about how Thomas Blackwood was too good a writer to just fall into Widow's Gorge, about how Eleanor never cried. And I kept thinking about Eleanor's eyes, that soldier's distance, that constant awareness. What kind of life makes a woman move like that? Somewhere around midnight, I made a decision. If I was going to keep watching Eleanor Blackwood, I needed to know who she really was, not just what she was doing now, but who she'd been before she came to Whispering Pines. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office. Old Samuel Potter ran it, had been the recorder for 30 years. If anyone knew the history of folks in Whispering Pines, it was him. "Morning, deputy," he said, looking up from his ledgers. "What brings you in?" "Research. Looking into the Blackwood property. When it was purchased, deed history, that sort of thing." Potter's eyebrows went up. "Sheriff, investigating something?" "Just routine, making sure all the paperwork's in order." He accepted that without question and pulled out the property records. The Blackwood deed was dated April 1873, purchased by Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood for cash money, straight sale. No mortgage. The land was 80 acres bordering the national forest to the west, with water rights to Sterling Creek. "They paid good money for that land," Potter observed. $3,000. "Most folks don't have that kind of cash lying around." "What did Thomas do for work?" I asked. "Rancher, mostly. Small operation. Some cattle. Some horses. Kept to himself. Wife, too." Potter squinted at the record. "Came from back east, I think. Pennsylvania, maybe, or Maryland, one of those places." "They say what they did before ranching?" Potter shrugged. "Never asked. Folks come west to start over. You don't pry too deep. That's the understanding." I thanked him and left, but my mind was turning. $3,000 in cash. That was serious money. What kind of ranchers, or whatever they'd been before, had that kind of wealth? And why choose Whispering Pines, Montana? Why this particular piece of land? The answers came from an unexpected source. I was having coffee at the saloon that afternoon when old Joseph Carter sat down across from me. Joseph was maybe 60, ran the livery stable, and had lived in Whispering Pines since before it had a name. He knew everyone and everything. "Heard you've been asking about the Blackwoods," he said without preamble. "Word traveled fast in a small town." I nodded. "I can tell you about them, least what I observed." He sipped his coffee. "They showed up in spring of '73, like I said. Young couple, seemed educated, polite. But there was something about them." "What kind of something?" "The way they carried themselves. Thomas had that military bearing, you know. Stood straight, moved economical-like, but it was the wife that really caught my eye." Joseph leaned forward. "She handled their wagon team like she'd been doing it her whole life. Not like a lady learning to drive, like a professional. And when she climbed down, I saw she was wearing a riding outfit that was quality, real quality. The kind you don't see in Montana." "So they had money." "More than that," Joseph tapped the table. "They had skills. Thomas knew horses like nobody I ever met. Could calm a spooked stallion with just his voice. And Eleanor, well, I saw her break up a fight outside the saloon one night. 2 miners going at each other with knives. She stepped between them, didn't raise her voice, and had them both backing down inside of a minute. I don't know what she said to them, but they looked scared. Of her. I tried to picture that. the quiet, composed woman I'd been following, breaking up a knife fight. They built that cabin in 3 months, Joseph continued, did most of the work themselves. Thomas would come into town for supplies, always polite, always paid cash. Eleanor came less often, but when she did, she'd spend time at the general store talking to Mrs. Peterson, asking about the area, who owned what land, where the trails led, how the law enforcement worked around here. Sounds like she was gathering intelligence. Joseph gave me a sharp look. That's exactly what it sounded like she was mapping the territory, learning the players. But for what purpose, I couldn't tell you. They seemed happy enough. Quiet. Kept to their ranch. Thomas would bring in horses to sell, good stock. Eleanor tended a garden. They'd come to church sometimes, sit in the back. He paused, staring into his coffee. Then Thomas found something he shouldn't have found. Don't know what exactly. But about a month before he died, he came into town looking troubled. Went straight to Sheriff Mills' office. Stayed there over an hour. When he came out, he looked even worse. My stomach tightened. What happened then? 2 days later he was dead. Fell into Widow's Gorge while tracking a wounded deer, they said. But I saw his horse that day, Deputy. That animal wasn't spooked or hurt. It was calm as Sunday morning. And Thomas's saddle was still cinched proper. If a man falls off during a panic, usually the saddle's loose or twisted. You think it wasn't an accident? Joseph met my eyes. I think Thomas Blackwood saw something that got him killed. And I think his widow knows exactly what it was, but she ain't told nobody. She just stayed on that ranch, working it alone, getting quieter and stranger with each passing month. He stood up to leave, then looked back at me. You want my advice, Deputy? Stop watching her like she's the problem. Start asking yourself who wanted Thomas dead and why Sheriff Mills never investigated it proper. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Joseph had said, about Thomas going to Mills, about the clean saddle on a calm horse, about Eleanor gathering intelligence like she was planning a campaign. I pulled out my journal and started writing, not the official report, the real one, the one where I admitted what I was really thinking. February 15th, 1876. I think Thomas Blackwood was murdered. I think Sheriff Mills knows more than he's saying, and I think Eleanor Blackwood is planning something, but not something criminal, something else. She moves like a soldier, thinks like a tactician, and she's preparing for something. The question is, preparing for what? And who's the real enemy? I was still writing when I heard the sound outside my window, hoofbeats in the snow, quiet, deliberate hoofbeats like someone trying not to be heard. I moved to the window and looked out into the darkness. A group of riders was moving through town. 6 men, maybe 7, riding in tight formation. They passed under the street lamp near the saloon, and I got a look at their faces. Hard men, armed men, not travelers passing through. These were men who knew where they were going and why, and they were heading toward the edge of town, toward the trail that led to Eleanor Blackwood's ranch. I grabbed my coat and gun belt, my heart hammering. This was it. Whatever trouble Sheriff Mills was worried about, it was happening now. But as I rushed downstairs and out into the street, one thought kept echoing in my head. Mills had told me to watch Eleanor, to keep an eye on her movements, to report back to him. He'd never said anything about armed riders moving through town in the middle of the night. Why not? Unless he already knew they were coming, unless he'd told them where to find her. I ran for my horse, praying I wasn't too late, not knowing if I was running to save Eleanor Blackwood or stop her, not knowing whose side I was really on, but knowing deep in my gut where the truth lives, that everything was about to change. The cold Montana night wrapped around me as I rode hard toward her ranch. The stars were bright and cold overhead. Snow kicked up from my horse's hooves. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, a widow was waiting. Maybe for rescue, maybe for war. I was about to find out which. I've ridden hard many times in my life. During the war, fleeing battles. After the war, running from memories. But I never rode harder than I did that night, racing through the Montana darkness toward Eleanor Blackwood's ranch. The riders had maybe a 10-minute head start on me. I could see their tracks in the snow, fresh and clear in the moonlight. 6 horses, riding in military formation. These weren't drifters or cowboys. These were men with purpose. My mind was racing faster than my horse. If Mills had sent them, why not tell me? If he hadn't, why didn't he warn me they were coming? And the biggest question of all, the one that made my stomach turn, was whether I was riding to save Eleanor or to help the men Mills might have sent. The night was bitter cold. My breath came out in clouds, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the weight of the badge on my chest and the growing certainty that I'd been played for a fool. Eleanor's ranch came into view as I crested the final ridge. Lamplight glowed from the cabin windows. The riders' horses were tied up outside. 5 of them, I counted now. They were already inside. I dismounted 50 yards out and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. My hand rested on my pistol grip. Everything in my training said I should be careful, strategic, smart about this. But my gut said I was already too late for smart. All I could do now was witness. Through the cabin window, I could see them clearly. 5 men standing in Eleanor's small living room, crowding the space with their bulk and their weapons. And Eleanor, standing by her fireplace, looking small and frightened, except I'd seen her move. I'd seen those soldiers' eyes, and the woman in that cabin looked nothing like the woman who'd confronted me on the trail. This woman's shoulders were hunched, her hands twisted together, her eyes were wide and scared. She was performing. The realization hit me like a fist to the gut. She was acting, playing the helpless widow for these men, and they were buying it completely. I moved closer, trying to hear what was being said. The largest of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence, was doing most of the talking. I recognized him from wanted posters that had come through the sheriff's office. Jackson Raven, leader of the Raven Creek Raiders, the gang that had been terrorizing the Northern Territory for the past year. Robberies, land seizures, protection schemes. The law had been after them for months, but they always seemed one step ahead. And here they were, in Eleanor Blackwood's cabin. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jackson was saying, his voice carrying through the window, "let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Your land is the final piece we need. $800, cash money, more than generous. This is my home." Eleanor's voice trembled convincingly. "My husband and I built this together. I can't just—" "Your husband is dead, ma'am." Another man spoke, this one with a scar running down his cheek. "Tragic accident, falling into that gorge. Montana's a dangerous place for folks alone. Accidents happen all the time." The threat was barely veiled. I felt my hand tighten on my pistol. "I need time to think," Eleanor said, "and this is so sudden. Time's the one thing we don't have." Jackson moved closer to her. "The territorial development is moving forward with or without your cooperation. The question is whether you benefit from it or become an obstacle to it." I was watching so intently that I almost missed the other movement. 3 more riders approaching from the East Road, but these weren't gang members, federal marshals. I recognized the lead rider, Marshal James Harrington, from the territorial office. What the hell were federal marshals doing here? Unless Eleanor had called them, unless this whole thing was a setup. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. The marshals arriving just as the gang was pressuring Eleanor. The coincidence, too perfect to be coincidence. Inside the cabin, Jackson had noticed the approaching riders too. He spun toward the window, cursed, then turned back to Eleanor. "Who did you contact?" His voice had gone hard, dangerous. "I don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor backed toward the fireplace. "I haven't contacted anyone. I've been alone since—" "Change of plans." Jackson grabbed Eleanor's arm. "You're coming with us. Wade, secure her. Hawkins, tell the boys to get ready to move. We've got company." I watched, frozen, as they bound Eleanor's hands, watched her struggle just enough to be believable, but not enough to actually fight. Watched them drag her toward the back door, using her as insurance. This was wrong, all of it. I should burst in, stop them, use my badge to— But something held me back. Some instinct that said if I showed myself now, I'd ruin whatever plan Eleanor had set in motion, because she had a plan. I could see it now, clear as day. She'd known the gang would come. She'd timed it perfectly with the marshal's arrival. She was controlling this whole situation like a general moving pieces on a chessboard. The question was, what came next? I followed them into the forest. The gang moved fast, using back trails that avoided the main roads where the marshals would look. Eleanor was mounted between two riders, her hands bound, her head down, playing the terrified captive. I stayed back far enough not to be heard but close enough to track them. The moon was full, the snow reflecting its light. Their trail was easy to follow. We'd been riding maybe 20 minutes when the first trap triggered. A massive pine tree, already damaged by lightning, came crashing down across the trail behind the gang. It didn't hit anyone, the timing was too precise for that, but it effectively blocked the path, cutting off any pursuit from the marshals. The gang horses spooked. Men shouted, bringing their mounts under control. Jackson's voice cut through the chaos. "That was no accident, someone rigged that." He wheeled his horse around, scanning the forest. "Mrs. Blackwood, you got something you want to tell us?" Eleanor's voice came out small and frightened. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything. Please, just let me go." But I saw Jackson's eyes narrow. He was starting to suspect. They pushed on, more cautious now. I followed, my heart pounding. Because I was starting to understand what Eleanor had done. She'd turned the entire forest into a weapon. The second trap was subtler. The gang had to cross Sterling Creek, the same creek that ran through Eleanor's property. The crossing looked normal enough, shallow water, rocky bottom, easy ford. But when the horses entered the water, one of them reared suddenly, nearly throwing its rider. Another horse slipped, its hoof catching in something beneath the water. Chaos erupted again as the gang struggled to get across. I watched from the tree line, and I saw it. The rocks in the streambed had been rearranged, pockets dug at precise locations. The crossing had been sabotaged, made treacherous in ways that wouldn't be visible until you were already committed. One of the gang members, a rough-looking man with cold eyes, examined his horse's leg once they'd crossed. "She's cut bad, boss. Metal shard embedded in the hoof, man-made, not natural." Jackson dismounted and inspected the injury himself. Then he turned slowly to look at Eleanor. "Strange coincidences we're having, Mrs. Blackwood. First a deadfall, now a sabotaged crossing." "I don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor's voice shook. "I'm just a widow. I don't know anything about traps or—" "Bullshit!" The man with the scarred face, Wade, I'd heard him called, grabbed Eleanor's horse's reins. "She's been planning this, setting us up." "No, Jackson held up a hand, silencing Wade. He studied Eleanor for a long moment, and I saw the calculation in his eyes, the suspicion warring with disbelief, because how could a grief-stricken widow engineer something like this? "We continue," he said finally, "but we're changing routes. Head for Blackthorn Ridge. We'll camp there for the night, sort this out in the morning." I knew Blackthorn Ridge, rocky outcropping, good defensive position, limited approaches, tactically sound, which meant Eleanor had probably prepared something there too. I waited until the gang was out of sight, then rode down to where they'd crossed the creek. In the moonlight, I could see what they'd missed. A small cairn of stones on the far bank, arranged in a specific pattern. A marker, for me, for the marshals, for someone. I followed the markers, 3 more spaced along the trail at intervals. Each one subtle enough that you'd miss it unless you were looking, each one pointing the way the gang had gone. Eleanor was leaving a trail, not for rescue, for something else. The 4th marker was different. Instead of stones, it was a piece of torn cloth tied to a branch, red cloth, visible even in moonlight. And beneath it, partially hidden under snow and leaves, was a leather satchel. I dismounted and opened it. Inside was a small arsenal, a compact pistol, ammunition, lockpicks, a detailed map of the area with various locations marked in different colors, and a letter. The letter was addressed to Marshal Harrington, but it was meant for whoever found it first, Marshal Harrington. If you're reading this, the plan is in motion. The Raven Creek Raiders have taken me hostage exactly as predicted. They'll head for Blackthorn Ridge tonight, then push for their compound tomorrow. All trap locations are marked on this map. Do not attempt to disarm them. Let them work. I've left a trail for your men to follow, but keep your distance. I need to get inside their operation. This is the only way to dismantle the entire network. If Deputy Garrison finds this first, and I suspect he will, tell him the truth. Tell him I brought him to Whispering Pines. Tell him I knew Sheriff Mills would hire him. Tell him I needed one honest man in that office when the time came. Tell him I'm sorry for using him, but I'm not sorry for trusting him. E. Blackwood. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my world shift a little more. She'd brought me here, deliberately. Known about me somehow, arranged for me to be hired, all of it, every bit of it, part of some plan she'd been building for a year, since Thomas died. I looked at the map with new eyes. The colored marks weren't random. Red indicated trap locations. Blue showed safe routes. Green marked supply caches like this one. And at the center of it all, circled in black, was a location labeled simply Compound. The Raven Creek Raiders' hideout. The place no lawman had been able to find despite months of searching. Eleanor knew where it was, had known all along, and she was delivering herself and the gang right to it. I sat there in the snow holding that letter and felt something crack open inside me. Not anger, not betrayal, something else. Understanding. This whole time I'd been watching her, trying to figure out what she was planning, reporting to Mills like a good little deputy, and she'd been 10 steps ahead of me the entire time. She'd known I was watching. She'd known Mills was corrupt. Had to be, if he was warning the gang, if he was trying to keep eyes on her. She'd known everything. And she'd used it all. The deadfall, the stream crossing. These weren't panic moves or lucky accidents. This was a tactical campaign, executed with military precision. She was herding the gang exactly where she wanted them, using herself as bait, turning their own arrogance and greed against them. Thomas Blackwood hadn't died in an accident. The gang had killed him, probably because he'd discovered their operation, just like Joseph had said. Probably because he'd reported it to Mills, who was on their payroll. And Eleanor, whoever she really was, whatever she'd been before she came to Whispering Pines, had spent an entire year preparing this. Not just revenge, justice. The kind of justice that required making yourself look weak while you built a trap so perfect your enemies would walk right into it. I thought about the war, about following orders because I was told they were right, about shooting that boy because my sergeant said he was a threat, about trusting authority because I was too young and scared to trust myself. I thought about Sheriff Mills, sitting in his office, sending me to spy on a widow, telling me it was for her own safety, lying to my face while taking money from the men who'd killed her husband. And I thought about Eleanor Blackwood, standing in the snow at dawn with her journal, walking like a soldier, watching like a general, planning something I'd been too blind to see. Tell him I'm sorry for using him, but I'm not sorry for trusting him. She'd trusted me to find this, trusted me to make the right choice when the moment came, trusted me even though I'd been spying on her for a man who was bought and paid for. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the satchel. Then I studied the map, memorizing the trap locations, the safe routes, the final destination. My hands were shaking, not from cold. From understanding what I had to do next, I had a choice to make. Go back to Mills, tell him everything, follow orders like a good deputy, or go forward, follow Eleanor into whatever hell she was riding toward, and finally do something right. Ray had told me once that war makes killers of us all, and the only thing that matters is what we do after. This was my after. I mounted my horse and followed Eleanor's trail into the darkness, not to stop her, not to save her, to help her finish what she'd started. Somewhere ahead, Eleanor Blackwood was riding into a camp of outlaws who thought they'd captured a helpless widow, who had no idea they were being led into a killing ground that had been prepared for a full year, who couldn't imagine that the frightened woman with bound hands had turned every tree, every rock, every inch of ground into a weapon. And somewhere behind me, Sheriff Mills was probably wondering where his deputy had gone, probably worrying that his careful corruption was about to unravel. Let him worry. I was done following orders from men who lied. It was time to learn what justice really looked like. And if it looked like a widow in the snow with a journal full of death, then so be it. The night was cold and clear. The stars were bright. And somewhere in those mountains, a trap was closing around men who'd gotten away with murder for too long. I rode on, following the markers Eleanor had left, following her plan, following her into war. Because sometimes the right choice means choosing a side. And I'd finally figured out which side I was on. I caught up to them at Blackthorn Ridge just before dawn. The gang had made camp in a clearing surrounded by twisted blackthorn trees. They'd posted guards, built a small fire, and tied Eleanor to one of the gnarled trunks. She sat with her head down, the picture of exhausted defeat. But I knew better now. I circled wide, staying in the shadows, watching, counting men, 6 total, including Jackson Raven. They were tired, suspicious, starting to turn on each other. The traps had done their work, planting seeds of doubt. "I'm telling you, boss," Wade was saying, "that widow's more than she seems. Nobody rigs a forest like that by accident." "She's a woman alone," Jackson replied, but he didn't sound convinced. "Probably hired some help, trappers maybe, to protect her land. Or maybe she knew we were coming." Jackson's head snapped toward Wade. "How would she know that?" "Same way we knew when to come. Someone told her. Someone with access to our plans." The accusation hung in the air. I could see the gang fragmenting, suspicion spreading like poison. Eleanor had done this, turned their own paranoia against them. That's when I saw the 6th man clearly for the first time. He stepped out of the shadows on the far side of the clearing, and the firelight caught his face. Ray Hawkins, my best friend, the man who'd saved my life at Petersburg, the brother I thought I'd lost to distance and time. Standing with the Raven Creek Raiders, I felt something die inside me, something that had been holding on, hoping that some piece of the good world still existed, that some people could be trusted, that the war hadn't ruined everything, but here was Ray, alive and well, and riding with murderers. I must have made some sound because his head turned sharply toward my position. His hand went to his pistol, but he didn't draw. He just stared into the darkness where I was hidden, and I knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew I was there. The next hour was the longest of my life. I watched Ray pace the camp's perimeter, getting closer to my position with each pass. The other gang members were arguing about their next move. Eleanor remained tied to the tree, silent and still. Finally, Ray stepped into the tree line, close enough that I could whisper, "Jamie." Just my name. Quiet. Sad. I stepped out where he could see me. We stood 5 feet apart. 2 men who'd once been brothers, now separated by every choice we'd made since the war ended. "Ray," I said, "what the hell are you doing here?" "Surviving." His face was haggard in the pre-dawn light. "Same as you." "This ain't surviving. This is murder, land theft, terror. And wearing a badge is so different?" He laughed bitterly. "You think the law's clean, Jamie? You think those marshals and sheriffs and deputies don't have blood on their hands?" "Not like this. No, not like this." He looked back toward the camp. "But I ran out of choices. War ended. No jobs, no money, no hope. Jackson offered me a place, a purpose. I took it." "You murdered people, Ray." His jaw tightened. "I did what I had to do to eat, to survive. Same as we did in the war. The war is over. Is it?" He met my eyes. "You still see that boy's face when you close your eyes, Jamie? The one with the white flag? Because I see all of mine. Every single one. The war don't end just because the generals say so." I didn't have an answer for that, because he was right. The war lived in both of us. Different ghosts, same haunting. "Why are you here?" Ray asked quietly. "You following that widow, or following us?" "Both. Neither." I pulled out Eleanor's letter. She's not what you think, Ray. She's been planning this for a year. Every trap, every move. You're all walking into something you can't see." He read the letter, his face going pale. When he looked up, there was something like relief in his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "What?" I said, "Good. I hope she kills every last one of us." He handed the letter back. "Jackson Raven murdered that widow's husband. I was there, Jamie. I watched them run him off that cliff, watched them stage it to look like an accident. And I didn't do a damn thing to stop it." His voice broke on the last words. "That's why I'm glad you're here. Glad she's got a plan. Because I've been wanting to die for 6 months now, but I'm too much of a coward to do it myself." I stared at my old friend, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a villain, just a broken man who'd made broken choices and couldn't find his way back. "You could help us," I said. "Testify. Tell the marshals everything. Make it right." "Ain't no making this right, brother, but maybe—" He looked toward Eleanor. "Maybe I can make it count for something, when the time comes, when her plan plays out. Ray, go," he said. "Get clear of here. Don't let them see you. Let this play out the way she planned it, and when it's over—" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small journal. "Give this to the marshals. It's everything. Every crime, every name, every detail. I've been keeping records, trying to find some way to make amends." He pressed it into my hands. "Tell the families I'm sorry," he said. "Tell them Ray Hawkins died trying to do one right thing." Then he walked back to the camp, leaving me standing in the trees with tears freezing on my face. The gang moved out at first light, heading northwest toward what I now knew was their hidden compound. Eleanor rode between two guards, hands still bound, head still down. But I'd seen her eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. Cold, calculating, waiting. I followed at a distance using the safe routes marked on Eleanor's map. The gang hit 2 more traps in the next 3 hours. A snare that caught a horse's leg, a carefully balanced rock slide that forced them to detour through a narrow canyon. With each trap, their paranoia grew. With each delay, their cohesion fractured. By the time they reached the compound, they were a collection of frightened, angry men instead of an organized gang. Exactly what Eleanor wanted. The compound sat in a natural basin surrounded by cliffs, one way in, one way out. Perfect defensive position, or perfect trap, depending on which side you were on. I watched from the ridge as they brought Eleanor inside, watched them relax, thinking they'd reached safety, watched them drink from water barrels that, according to Eleanor's map, had been poisoned weeks ago. The federal marshals were in position on the surrounding ridges. I'd found them an hour before dawn, shown them Eleanor's map, told them everything. Marshal Harrington had listened with a grim expression. "She's been planning this alone for a year?" he'd asked. "Yes, sir." Christ, she always was stubborn. He'd said it like he knew her, like she'd done this kind of thing before. "Sir, who is Eleanor Blackwood, really?" Harrington had studied me for a long moment. Someone who should have stayed retired. Someone who loved her husband enough to risk everything for justice. That's all you need to know, Deputy. Now, as I watched the compound from my vantage point, I understood what he meant. Eleanor wasn't just a widow seeking revenge, she was something else. Something professional. Something deadly. And she was about to show everyone exactly what that meant. The attack came at dawn. Not from the marshals, from Eleanor. I don't know how she got free of her bonds. Don't know when she poisoned the gang's ammunition stores, sabotaged their weapons, blocked their escape routes. But when the sun rose over that compound, chaos erupted. Men stumbling from buildings, sick from the water, guns misfiring when they tried to shoot, horses spooked and breaking free. And in the middle of it all, Eleanor Blackwood, no longer playing the frightened widow. She moved like smoke through the compound, taking down men with efficient, brutal precision. Not killing, she'd promised the marshals live prisoners, but incapacitating. A strike to the knee, a blow to the temple. Pressure points that dropped men like stones. The marshals stormed in as the gang's defense collapsed. It was over in 15 minutes. But not for everyone. I saw Ray during the chaos. Saw him standing in the center of the compound, not fighting, not fleeing. just standing there with his hands at his sides. Jackson Raven saw him too. "You," Jackson snarled, blood running from his nose where Eleanor had broken it. "You betrayed us, gave her information." "No," Ray said quietly. "I didn't have to. She already knew everything." "Because you're predictable, Jackson. You're bullies and cowards, and you operate on patterns. She just had to watch and wait." Jackson lunged for his gun, but it misfired, sabotaged ammunition. He grabbed a knife instead and came at Ray. I was too far away. The marshals were occupied with other gang members. It was just Ray and Jackson and a blade. Ray didn't defend himself. The knife took him in the ribs, and he fell. Jackson raised it for a second strike, but Eleanor was there, taking Jackson down with a move so fast I barely saw it. I ran to Ray, dropping to my knees beside him. Blood soaked his shirt. "Jamie," he whispered, "you made the right choice, brother. Finally. Don't talk. We'll get you help. The marshals have a surgeon." "No." His hand gripped mine. "This is good. This is right. Tell the families. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them Ray Hawkins died on the right side." Ray, but his eyes were already going distant, going to wherever soldiers go when the war finally ends. I held him as he died. My best friend, my brother, the man who'd saved my life and lost his own soul in the process. And I wept. The aftermath took weeks. Jackson Raven and 4 of his gang stood trial in the territorial capital. Ray's journal, combined with Eleanor's evidence and the testimony of captured gang members, revealed a network of corruption that stretched across 3 counties. Sheriff Clayton Mills was arrested trying to flee to Canada. They found $12,000 in his saddlebags, blood money from the gang. When I went to see him in his cell, he couldn't meet my eyes. "I had debts, Jamie," he said quietly. "My daughter was sick, needed medicine I couldn't afford. Jackson offered to help just once, but once was enough. After that, he owned me. You could have come clean, asked for help. Could I?" He looked up at me. "From who? The law I was supposed to represent? The town I was supposed to protect? I was the law, Jamie. I was supposed to be the answer." I thought about that. About how easy it is to make one wrong choice and find yourself trapped by it. How quick a good man can become a bad one when he is scared enough. "Thomas Blackwood came to you," I said, "told you about the gang, and you told Jackson." Mills nodded, tears running down his weathered face. "I thought I was protecting the town, thought if I could just manage the situation, keep things calm. But Thomas was going to the territorial marshals. So Jackson," he couldn't finish. "I left him there in that cell. Heard later he tried to hang himself with his belt, but the guard stopped him. He stood trial and got 20 years. Died in prison after 3. I'd like to say I felt satisfaction at his fall, but I didn't. I just felt sad. Sad for all of us who'd put on badges thinking we knew what justice looked like, only to learn how complicated it really was." The day after Jackson Raven was hanged, I found Eleanor at Thomas's grave. It was spring now. The snow had melted. Wildflowers were blooming across the valley. She stood with her hand on the simple wooden cross, not crying, just standing there in the morning light. "They offered me my old job back," she said without turning around. "The Pinkerton Agency. Said they could use someone with my skills." "You going to take it?" "No." She finally looked at me. "Thomas wanted me to leave that life behind, build something clean, something good. I owe it to him to try." "What will you do?" "The territorial governor offered me a position, training deputies and marshals, teaching them how to see what I see, how to think strategically." She smiled slightly. "Seems someone recommended me highly." I felt my face heat. Marshal Harrington had asked me to write a report on Eleanor's operation. I might have been generous in my assessment. "You earned it," I said. "So did you." She reached into her coat and pulled out a badge. Not a deputy badge, a full sheriff's star. "The town council voted. They want you as sheriff, if you'll take it." I stared at the badge, feeling its weight, before I even touched it. "I'm 23 years old. I don't know anything." "You know the most important thing." Eleanor pressed the badge into my hand. "You know how to choose what's right over what's easy. You know how to see the truth even when it hurts. That's all a sheriff needs. Mills taught me. Mills taught you what not to do. I taught you what you already knew, but were too scared to trust. Your own judgment. I looked at the badge, then at her. Did you really bring me here? Plan for me to be hired? She nodded. I researched you, your war record, your character. I knew Mills needed a deputy. I sent a letter recommending you, using a false name. He never knew it came from me. Why? Because I needed one honest man in that office when everything came apart. I needed someone who would choose truth over loyalty, and I knew from everything I learned about you that you would. She paused. Was I wrong? I thought about that moment in the forest, reading her letter, making my choice. Thought about following her into danger instead of running to Mills. Thought about Ray's final words. You made the right choice, brother. No, I said, you weren't wrong. I served as sheriff of Whispering Pines for 8 more months, long enough to help rebuild what Mills' corruption had damaged, long enough to train my replacement, long enough to understand that wearing a badge didn't make you righteous. Your choices did. Then I moved on, worked as a territorial marshal for a few years, eventually settled in Denver, married, had children, lived a good, quiet life. But I never forgot that winter, never forgot Eleanor Blackwood and what she taught me. Never forgot Ray Hawkins and the price of wrong choices. Never forgot that sometimes justice looks like a widow in the snow with a journal full of careful plans. And I kept that deputy's badge, the one Eleanor gave me that day at Thomas's grave. Kept it to remember the moment I finally understood what it meant to be a lawman. Not following orders, not trusting authority, but seeing clear and choosing right, no matter what it cost. I close the journal now and look at my grandson. He's 12 years old, same age I was when my father died at Shiloh. Same age where a boy starts becoming a man and needs to understand what that means. That's the story, I tell him. That's what this badge represents. Not authority, not power, just one choice. One moment when I finally did something right. What happened to Mrs. Blackwood? He asks. I smile. Last I heard, she's running a law enforcement academy in Helena, teaching sheriffs and marshals how to think like she does, how to see the patterns, prepare for trouble, protect their communities. She's about your grandmother's age now. Still sharp as a tack, they say. Did she ever remarry? No. Thomas was her great love. Everything she did after was for him, to honor his memory, to prove that his faith in justice wasn't misplaced. I pause. That's real love, boy. Not flowers and poetry, but living your life in a way that honors what they believed in. The fire pops in the hearth. Snow falls outside the window. Denver in winter looks a lot like Montana did back in '76. Grandpa, my grandson says quietly, do you think you made the right choice? Going against the sheriff? Helping Mrs. Blackwood? I consider this carefully. It's the most important question he could ask. I think there's 2 kinds of right in this world, I say finally. There's lawful right, following the rules, doing what you're told, staying in your lane. And there's moral right, doing what's just, even when it's hard, even when it costs you. Which one's better? Neither. Most times they're the same thing, but sometimes they split apart, and when they do, you have to choose. I pick up the badge, feel its familiar weight. I chose moral right that night, and it cost me my best friend, cost Mills his career and freedom, cost the town their faith in authority. But the bad men got caught. Yes, justice was served. But justice ain't clean, boy. Justice is complicated and messy, and sometimes the people who serve it are broken themselves. I look at him. Ray Hawkins was a murderer, but he was also my brother who saved my life. Mills was corrupt, but he was also a desperate man trying to save his dying daughter. Eleanor was righteous, but she was also someone who spent a year planning to destroy human beings. So there's no heroes? I didn't say that. I lean forward. There's people who choose right when it matters. People who see clear and act true. That's all a hero is. Not perfect. Not sinless. Just someone who chooses right when the moment comes. I hand him the badge. I'm giving you this now, not because you need to be a lawman, but because someday, might be tomorrow, might be 50 years from now, you'll face a choice between what's easy and what's right, between loyalty to authority and loyalty to truth, between following orders and following your conscience. How will I know which to choose? You'll know. I tap his chest. In here you'll know. Same place I knew when I read Eleanor's letter. Same place Ray knew when he handed me his journal. We always know. We just don't always listen. He holds the badge carefully, reverently. What if I choose wrong? Then you learn, and you do better next time. I lean back in my chair. The West ain't what it used to be, boy. We got automobiles now, electric lights, telephones, but people are the same. We still face hard choices. We still have to decide what kind of men we want to be. What kind did you become, Grandpa? I think about that widow standing in the snow, about my best friend dying in my arms, about a corrupt sheriff weeping in his cell, about all the years since trying to balance the scales. I became the kind who tries, I say simply, who fails sometimes but keeps trying, who remembers that justice ain't about being perfect. It's about being honest, about seeing the truth even when it hurts, about choosing right even when it costs everything. Outside the snow falls soft and steady. Inside the fire burns warm. And between us the badge gleams in the firelight, a small piece of metal that represents the hardest lesson I ever learned. That sometimes the widow is the hero. Sometimes the lawman is the villain. Sometimes your best friend is the enemy. And sometimes doing what's right means standing alone against everyone you're supposed to trust. But you stand anyway. Because that's what justice looks like. Not a courthouse or a hanging. Not a badge or a gun. Just one person, choosing truth over comfort. Choosing right over easy. Choosing to see clear, even in the blinding snow. My grandson falls asleep holding that badge, and I cover him with a blanket. Outside, Denver sleeps under winter stars. Somewhere in Montana, Eleanor Blackwood is probably looking at those same stars, remembering the same winter, carrying the same lessons. We're old now, both of us. The West has changed, but the truth hasn't. Justice is a widow in the snow, setting traps for murderers. Justice is a deputy choosing conscience over orders. Justice is a dying man's confession making amends. Justice is complicated and costly and worth every bit of pain it takes to serve. I learned that in the winter of 1876, in a small town called Whispering Pines, from a woman who taught me to see clear, and I've never forgotten. Never will. The end.